there's nothing grammatically wrong with passive voice, and sometimes it's necessary for effect, and sometimes things just don't sound right if you write them in active voice. But again, master the rules before you break them. Sometimes in academic writing, it's necessary to write in passive voice because there's this weird thing of writing objectively and not writing in the first person. In this class, it's fine to write in the first person because we're talking about our arguments and stuff. But sometimes when you're doing research, you're expected to write from the second person's perspective. So you can't speak from that first person. So you have to say the research was done to show, rather than we did the research showing. A simple way to, this isn't definitively how to remove passive voice from your writing, but an easy way to do it and get enough of it out of the way to not have to worry about it, I still do this, is to go through and make sure you've removed, or go through and check every conjugation of the verb to be. So go through and look for every to be, is, are, was, were, and determine whether or not it's necessary. Figure out if you can say it in a different way. And that should be sufficient, I think. That's how I do it anyway. And so I'm going to conclude with some general pointers just on assignments and writing. I believe I've already made it. If I haven't, I will. I made an announcement and sent an email listing these pointers and more, so you can get them in that format as well. One very rudimentary thing, make a checklist for every portion of the assignment and sub-portion of the assignment. Or just have the assignment by you, or the instructions by you, and as you're doing the assignment, go through and check off to make sure you've covered everything in the assignment. Quotations are oftentimes a big problem, and that's understandable. I mean, when we speak, when we use quotations, it's just kind of fluid. When we write, it's kind of awkward to figure out how do we fit this in here. So the problem I see with quotations a lot of times is people just throw them out without prefacing them. They just throw them out and don't give them any context or anything. So please don't do that. For example, say something like, Tavani argues this point by saying that, quote, with respect to information technology, users tend to, etc., end quote. You should probably follow this up with also, rather than just jumping straight into the next subject. That way it puts the quotation in context and isn't just kind of, here's a quotation just to show that you've done the, you've looked at the book and done the reading. Try to avoid contraction, slang, and informal language. Term papers usually require a formal to semi-formal tone. And again, if you are an excellent writer, you can get away with this if you know how to break the rules. But if you struggle, follow the rules and you shouldn't have any problems. Make sure what you write makes sense. Read it out loud to yourself. I think that the writing and the speaking part of our brains aren't in the same place, and sometimes we write something and we think it makes sense, and then when we read it out loud we realize it doesn't. And I wrote a dissertation. It was about 100 pages long, and I probably would go through it 5 times before realizing that a sentence didn't make sense. So if you're not going through and proofreading, I guarantee you're going to write stuff that doesn't make sense. And reading out loud is one way to help remedy that. If you have serious problems with this, have someone else proofread it for you. Sometimes a second set of eyes, I mean, almost always a second set of eyes is extremely helpful. And you can also contact the Writing Center. I'll put the URL up here, and again, these are these pointers are in an announcement, so that URL will be available to you there. You can also just Google UWM Writing Center, and I think it's the first hit. This one's kind of complicated, and this might be one case where I'm being nitpicky, but it just doesn't sound right if you do this, so bear with me. When you're talking about something X that resembles something Y addressed by some author, don't say that that author says something specifically about X. For example, Tavani, Charles S., they say nothing about the personal information technology use of anyone in this class. And I wouldn't bring this up if this didn't happen a lot. So saying that Tavani or S says such and such about my personal online shopping habits is incorrect. However, I know what you mean when you say Tavani says that my online shopping exhibits such and such. I know what you mean by that, but it's incorrect to say that. So you can say it this way, and it's correct. Tavani might argue that my online shopping exists or exhibits such and such. So to say that he might say such and such about my online shopping habits is fine, but to say he speaks specifically about your shopping habits, he doesn't know you. He doesn't say anything about your shopping habits. And a lot of times people do this very abstractly, or talking about some very abstract point that the author is making, and kind of intuit that he's talking specifically about some specific behavior in their life, and that's incorrect. This is not nitpicky. This is very important. Don't refer to concepts and terminology without defining and explaining them. Pretend that you're writing for an audience with no knowledge of the subject you're writing about. For example, if you say that a certain law exhibits Confucian ideals towards information property, you need to say what that theory, Confucianism, is and how your example exhibits it. Otherwise, I have no idea of knowing whether or not you know what you're talking about. I just know that you went through the reading and picked out terminology and inserted it in the sentence. So that's essential. I need to know that you understand what you're talking about, not that you just have pulled out important terminology. So that concludes the writing and critical thought and analysis lecture. We talked about critical thought and analysis. Give a statement, provide a counter argument, respond to that counter argument, do this a sufficient number of times, conclude, think of it like as what goes on in a courtroom. We reiterated validity and soundness, talked about analogy and false analogy, necessary and sufficient conditions, dichotomy, false dichotomy, inclusive and exclusive or, and I concluded with writing pointers. I hope that this was helpful. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to contact me, and I look forward to seeing you on the discussion boards.